My name's Bertie too. I want to introduce this book by Vivian French, Giant's Tea Party. And it's really good, and I hope you like it too.
Oh, thank you very much, Bertie. And I'm really glad it was you that introduced it, because you know what? If I had been a boy, I was going to have been called Bertie. And I think it's one of my favourite names. And I thought, well, when I have a child, when I have a baby, I shall call it Bertie. And all I had was girls. And they didn't seem very keen on being called Bertie, but it's lovely to meet you. And thank you for the introduction. And thank you also to Bailey Gifford for supporting the Big Dog Festival. And it's so lovely to be here. I'm just sorry that I'm not there in person. But in a way, this is fun because people from everywhere can join in. So my name is Vivian French, and I'm going to be talking about the Giant's Tea Party. And just here, I have my cakes and biscuits. I'm not going to eat them while I'm talking because I tend to get very sticky when I'm eating cake, and I think might make rather a mess. I'll probably end up with jam on my chin. So how did I come to write the Giant's Tea Party? Well, it goes back a long, 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 long time to when I was little. And when I was little, my dad read me a bedtime story every single night. And he went on reading me stories until I was quite old. I think I must have been 10 or 11 or maybe even 12 before he finally decided that I should read my stories for myself. And the stories that he read me were about fairies and witches and trolls and all kinds of different things like that. And I really, really loved them. And I loved being read out loud too. I still do, actually. I love listening to stories. And in fact, if anybody wants to listen to this story rather than reading it, you can actually hear it because I recorded it. So he used to tell me all these stories, and I grew up loving stories. I loved stories, but actually when I was at school, I was not very good at writing stories. I don't know whether anybody listening has this problem, but I am not very good at spelling. And I also have terrible handwriting. I'm not even going to show you my handwriting because you wouldn't be able to read it anyway. When I was away from home, when I was younger, I used to write my mum and dad letters, and they used to ring me up and they used to say, what was it that you said in your letter? Because we can't read your writing. So I never thought of being a writer. What I did end up being was an actor. And that was great because I could tell stories by acting them out with a theatre company. And the stories that I told, a lot of them, well, all of them were for children. So it was a great combination. And then from being an actor, I became a storyteller. And I still do sometimes go into schools and tell stories. And then somebody said to me, why don't you ever write your stories down? And I said, because I'm no good at writing. I was quite grown up by this stage. And she said, rubbish. She said, if you can tell a story, you can write a story. And I always say to any children that I meet in schools or in festivals or anywhere else, don't let anybody ever tell you that you can't write a story, because you can. So that was, I went away, and that was how I came to write my very first story. And once I'd started writing, it was a bit like eating chocolate. It's always very hard to stop. And I went on writing stories. And the ones that I loved best were the stories that had a kind of echo of the stories that my dad told me. And I used to think about those stories a lot. And when it came to inventing my own stories, I thought, well, why don't I take something from those old stories and change it? And one of the, at the very beginning, the Giant's Tea Party is actually one of 5 different books. There's a whole load of them, and there they are. And the Giant's Tea Party is the latest one. But the very first one that I wrote was a book called The Adventures of Alfie Onion. And by the miracle of being on the screen, a picture can come up. And there is a picture of Alfie Onion. So you can see Alfie. Lovely. Thank you very much. Bye, Alfie. And Alfie started because my dad had told me a story about the 7th son of a 7th son. And apparently, I don't know whether you know this, but the 7th son of a 7th son gets to be magic and gets to have wonderful adventures and really, really enjoys themselves. And I thought, so the 7th son of a 7th son is meant to be a hero. But what would happen if he wasn't? And so that was how the story of Alfie Onion started. And Alfie is not the 7th son of a 7th son. Alfie is actually the 8th son. And the 7th son is useless at being a hero. All he really wants to do is stay at home and eat pies. And when he's forced to go off to have his adventures, he doesn't enjoy them at all. And it's Alfie who has to sort them out. So that story came about from me thinking, what if the 7th son wasn't any good? And the next one I wrote was The Cherry Pie Princess. And that story came because I was thinking about Sleeping Beauty. And if you remember, in Sleeping Beauty, there are fairy godmothers and they give the baby a wish. And by the miracle of the screen, we can see the 3 fairy godmothers. There they are. And they're looking in the cradle at the baby. But in my story, thank you. In my story, they're not looking at a baby girl. They're looking at a baby boy. And the story is all about how things go really wrong. And it starts, in fact, this story in a library, because I really like libraries. And a librarian upsets the king and the queen, who are the parents of the baby. And one of the princesses has to go and try and rescue him from the dungeon. But that all started with thinking about fairy godmothers and what if it was a boy instead of a girl? So you can beginning to get the idea that I like to change things. And I should show you my favorite character from the Cherry Pie Princess. And this is the hag. If you look at the picture, here is the hag of Scrabster's Hump. And I just love her. All the pictures in these books are done by somebody called Marta Kissy. And I think she's fabulous. I love her dearly. And at the very end of the story, she gets her comeuppance. So that was the Cherry Pie Princess. And that started because of fairy godmothers. And the next one was about witches, because I love that picture of a witch so much. And I thought, well, do you get good witches as well as bad witches? And I thought, yeah, I think you probably do. You can get it's like good fairies and bad fairies. So I thought, right, let's have a book all about witches. And here you can see the trainee witch, and there she is, and she's arriving in the middle of the witches' get together. And I love that picture. There she is, and all the witches are looking absolutely horrified as she arrives. And just at the very beginning of that story, I've got a rhyme that they all sing. And I'm just going to read you that, even though it's not the book I'm meant to be talking about, because I think this is fun. Toast the toad and baste the bat, mash the mouse tails, roast the rat, steam the snails and slice the slugs. Don't forget to boil the bugs. Prick a pimple with a pin. Let our meeting now begin. So that was a story all about witches. And then I was asked to write another book in the same series. And I thought, I've had witches, I've had fairy godmothers, I've had heroes. In the Elfie Onion book, there are some trolls and some ogres. And what have I not had? And I thought, oh, I can remember my dad telling me lots of stories about dragons. And the dragons were really ferocious and they kept princesses tied up to a rock. And I thought, what would happen if you had a vegetarian dragon? And I thought, well, I'll have to have a hero. And I thought, well, if I've got a vegetarian dragon, that's not quite the sort of dragon that people are used to. So maybe I'd better have a hero and a heroine who are not quite what you might expect. And if you look at the picture of the princess, here she is. And as you can see, she's wearing a very, very tatty old dress and she's underneath the table. And she's underneath the table because she's got a horrible little brother. And he is very demanding. Actually, in fact, the story starts with him going, "Yuck, my eggs wonny." Prince Dribble threw down his spoon. And that's his sister. And she turns out to be she's the hero, or the heroine, along with Billy, who is from an orphanage. So all those stories started with something that I had learnt about from my dad when I was little. And then I thought, right, I was asked if I'd like to write another one. And I thought, I'm beginning to run out of ideas. What other stories have I had? What other stories have I read? And I decided that I would think about the goose that laid golden eggs. And here's a picture of the goose, or one of the geese. And this is a goose that actually can lay golden eggs. And that's the goose that started the whole idea for the Dragon's Tea Party. And again, I thought, well, it's all very well geese laying golden eggs, but what if they stop laying golden eggs? What happens if there's something goes wrong? And I thought, well, what might stop a goose laying golden eggs? And I thought, maybe they don't get the right things to eat. Maybe they have a special diet. And if you have a special diet and you can't get it, then you stop laying golden eggs. So again, I had to think about what kind of hero I was going to have. And I decided that it would be fun to have a hero called Max, because I have a great friend called Max. And then I thought, who would have geese that laid golden eggs? And I thought, well, maybe it was a king, maybe it was a queen. And then I thought, no, I've had a lot of kings and queens. And Max is going to be a prince, the guy who goes on the adventure. And I thought, let's have some giants, because I'd not done a story about giants. So I decided that I was going to have it being the giants that own the geese that have the golden eggs. And I'm going to read you a little bit from the beginning of the Giants' Tea Party. Now, as I said, the hero is called Max, and he lives with his father and his mother, who are the king and the queen. The king and the queen of Little Slippington, but they have no money at all. They're very, very poor. And the king and the queen are having a discussion about how they can get hold of some money. And the queen is not very clever, and she keeps making really rather silly suggestions. And the king says, the king pointed at his head, "I must be the only king ever to wear a crown made of paper." "But we've got Maximilian." The queen patted her son's hand. "He could marry a pretty princess with plenty of lovely gold." Max looked horrified. "Mother, that's so old-fashioned. I want to marry someone because I love them, not because they're rich." His mother shook her head. "Couldn't you consider marrying to save the chickens? Your father does so love a boiled egg." "Absolutely not." Max folded his arms. "I'd rather fight a dragon or a monster or a giant." Queen Gloria stared at him for a long moment, and then, With a shriek of excitement, she clapped her hands, and her knitting fell on the floor. Of course, the giants! The giants of Golden Hollow! I remember my nurse telling me about them. They have cups, plates, and teapots, all made of gold. Even their toothbrushes are made of gold. She stopped, looking puzzled. How can you clean your teeth with a gold toothbrush? Max didn't answer. He was thinking. I've never heard of these giants. Have you, Pa? King Ferdinand frowned. No, and I don't like the sound of them. Are you sure your nurse wasn't telling you fairy stories, Gloria? I'm certain. The Queen's eyes were shining. So Max decides that he's going to go and find the giants and to see if they'll give him some gold. But he's not quite sure how to go or where to go or how to talk to giants. And Max really, really loves reading. Unfortunately, his parents have sold all his storybooks because they ran out of money. But he's got one or two left. And then he has an idea. He says, I've read about giants in my storybooks. Some of them are very fierce. We need to find out the best way to talk to them. I don't have the right kind of book, but I've heard of someone who might be able to help. The cook told me about her ages ago. She's called the Wisest One. And the cook, she told the cook exactly how to make a perfect rhubarb crumble. And there she is. Max goes to visit her, and you can see, and she's absolutely surrounded by books. I love that picture. I'm going to look like that quite soon, I think. Completely surrounded by books, and in all her pockets are books. And I don't know whether you can see, but at her feet on the floor is a very strange animal. And it's not quite a leopard, and it's not quite a lion, and it's not quite anything else. It's like a very enormous sort of cat, and it's called Caramel. And the Wisest One, Max says, can she help? And she says, yes, perhaps she could. And she gives him a book to help him on his way. And he's very grateful. And he takes the book and he goes, and off he goes. He and the Wisest One, to start off with, they don't get on too well, but then they discover they've read the same book. And you know that lovely feeling when you find somebody who's read a book that you really, really like, and they really, really like it too. And it's a real bond. So that's why she agrees to help him. And she tells him that he's going to have to cross the Hungry Marshes. And Horace mentioned them, Max said. Horace is a donkey, very grumpy donkey that Max goes with. Are they very scary? The animal lying at the Wisest One's feet sat up, and Max took a startled step back. It was considerably larger than a cat, but it didn't look like a leopard or a tiger or anything he'd seen in his animal books. I've heard the Hungry Marshes are absolutely terrifying, sweetie, the animal said. Those marshes gobble up everyone who tries to cross them. And after they've gobbled them up, they burp a few times and wait for more. Be quiet, Caramel, the Wisest One said. You've never been to the marshes. You're just trying to scare the boy. So Max discovers that the only way that he can cross the Hungry Marshes is to tell them stories, which is very like my dad telling me stories, and that stories are the way to succeed in defeating the marshes. And of course, he's quite nervous, and it's only with a bit of an effort and a bit of help from Caramel, who comes with him, that he managed to get to the other side. And when he gets to the other side, that's when he meets the giants of Golden Hollow. And I thought I would have quite fun with the giants. So rather than having a kind of a tall well, but they're very, very tall because they're giants. But rather than having a king or a queen, I'd have a king of the giants and his granddaughter. And that's because I really, really like my grandparents. And I also thought it would be fun if the king, King Glom, was not really interested in gold at all. And in fact, turns out they don't have much money either. But King Glom has an obsession. He wants to make, and we've got a picture of it, he wants to make a flying machine. Just look at his flying machine. I think it's absolutely great. And Marta Kissy, who does the illustrations, she really had fun with this. She's given it a fish face, and it's got kind of propellers and this and that and the other. And unfortunately, the one thing it doesn't do is fly. And it's the giants who own the geese, and they've given up laying eggs. And she's got to find, she discovers that what she needs to feed them are some roots called paparelli roots. She says, if I can find the roots, I can feed our geese and they'll lay lots of golden eggs. And I promise I'll buy you the very loudest trumpet ever. Glom's smile faded a little, then broke out again. Let's find that book. And he dived into a chaotic pile of crumpled paper, torn envelopes, books, and general rubbish. Ah! With a cry of triumph, he unearthed a battered brown book and waved it in the air. Hamfrida, that's the name of the giant, his granddaughter, looked at it and shook her head. No, Gramps, this is 50 ways to peel a parsnip. Oh. Her grandfather dived back into the pile. 5 minutes later, he had found How to Learn to Dance the Rumpelposer, The Jokes of a Humorous Hedgehog, and Snail Taming for Beginners, but no book of really useful things. So I had great fun naming all the different books that they find before they finally find the book of really useful things, which is where it should tell you where paparelli roots grow. But I don't want to make it too easy for my giants. So something is wrong with the book. And I'm not actually going to tell you what it is, because maybe, just hopefully, you might read the story and then you'll find out for yourself what happens. So the paparelli roots are what they're looking for, and that's what they need. So I've got all these characters, and King Glom and Hamfrida, and what I tried to do was make the two stories so that they actually link together. So although Max does find the giants, and he does find Hamfrida and her grandfather, and of course they haven't got any gold when he gets there. So they have to go and they have to try and have an adventure together. Now, when they're having their adventure, obviously, if you're writing a story, you need to have some bad characters. And I don't know about you, but I really, really like bad characters in stories. And in this story, there are some characters called Mr. and Mrs. Crimp. And here they are in the picture, and you can see, looking at them, that they don't look exactly pleasant. And that's Horace, the donkey, and he's the one who Max is riding on. And the Crimps are determined to get any gold that Max gets hold of. They want to keep for their very own. And as I read you that poem from whichever book it was, The Witch's Feast, and I thought it would be fun to give the Crimps something to say as well. And Mrs. Crimp and Mr. Crimp do their very best to try and persuade Max to come back and to give them all the gold that he's got. And they do a trade with him. I'm not going to tell you what they trade, but he says, Mrs. Crimp says, when you're grumpy, when you're sad, nothing's good and life is bad. When you're feeling bleak and blue, we've got just the cure for you. Take our cure is what we say. You'll be laughing every day. And it's their cure that they swap with Max, or they give to Max. And as I say, I just love writing bad characters. And one of the things I often get asked is, when I'm writing a story, do I just sit down and then start writing and then get to the middle and then get to the end and that's it? And in fact, no, I don't. What I do before I write stories is I make a little plan. And I'm sure that if you write stories in school, your teachers all say to you, you have to plan your story before you start. Because if you don't plan your story, it's like going on a walk without a map. And you get lost, at least I do. And a couple of times I've started a story and I've thought, nah, I know what I'm going to write about. So I start writing the story and I get to the middle. And then I think, I've no idea what to write next. So I always plan the beginning. I think of the beginning like thinking about geese that lay golden eggs and something has gone wrong with them. And then I don't plan the middle. I plan the ending, because I find that really, really helps me. If I start with the beginning and then the ending, then I know where I'm going. It's like having a map and I know where my destination is. And that really, really helps me all along the way. So I make all kinds of notes. I don't write with a pen or a pencil because, like I say, I've got terrible handwriting and I probably wouldn't be able to tell what I'd written. But I do write notes with a pencil, and quite often in capitals, because that way it makes it easier for me to read it back. And I'll think of all the different things that I can put in along the way, like having the crimps. I gave them a wheelbarrow because I knew that at the end of the story, a wheelbarrow would come in useful. And that's one of the things, if you're planning a story, it's like making a cake. You need to put all your ingredients in at the beginning so that you can use them as you're writing the story. If you kind of slot them in towards the end, it just doesn't feel right. If you were writing a story and there were a lot of children in a boat and the wind was blowing very hard and the engine had stopped and the oars had floated away and they didn't have a mobile phone, and then all of a sudden a whale swam up and said, "Can I help you?" I would need to know why that whale had turned up. And I would have needed, when I was writing the story, to set up something at the beginning of the story, which meant that the whale owed those children a favor, so that when they needed help, the whale was ready to come with it. If the whale had come out of nowhere, it just wouldn't feel right. And it's the same when I'm writing stories with the Giant's Tea Party. A couple of times I had to go back to the beginning and alter things so that it made sense and I could use them for the end, like giving the Queen the character that she's got. So that's a little bit about how I wrote the Giant's Tea Party and about the Giant's Tea Party. And of course, if it's called the Giant's Tea Party, what does it have to end with? It has to end with a tea party. And Marta drew, there you are, there's Marta's picture of a tea party. And she's got cakes and all kinds of things. And I've got my cakes here. My cakes aren't nearly as exciting as Marta's. I did try and find a cake with cherries all the way around. Like, I think those are cherries that she's drawn. I'm not quite sure. And but I couldn't find one. That was a bit of a shame. And just so that you know, I am starting, well, in fact, I'm starting to correct the sixth story. And that's called, we've had Giant's Tea Party, Dragon's Breakfast, Witch's Feast, Cherry Pie, and Adventures of Alfie Onion. So I had to kind of keep the food theme going. And so my final book is going to be called The Wizard's Banquet. And it's about wizards because they were the only things that I could think of that I hadn't written about. So I had, so I thought I'll bring in some wizards. Now, all kinds of questions have come in, and that's lovely. And this is a question from, I think it's Kyron. What was my favourite story of the ones your dad told you about? That is a very difficult question to answer because I loved the stories. I used to really love the Rudyard Kipling stories, like the ones How the Elephant Got His Trunk. I used to make him read me that over and over again. And I had a collection of Hans Christian Andersen stories, and I loved those. And I loved the stories by Oscar Wilde, like The Selfish Giant. And I used to, with Hans Christian Andersen, I used to cry and cry and cry over the steadfast tin soldier, because at the end he gets melted in the fire and all that is left is a little leaden heart. And as a child, I cried really easily. I had a wicked aunt, and she wasn't really wicked, but she used to love teasing me, and she used to tell me a story about somebody who had a coat and the button fell off and it rolled away into the gutter and was never seen again. And that used to make me cry and cry and cry. I think one of my favourite stories probably was Beauty and the Beast. And I loved that story because Beauty actually has some of the action. A lot of the stories that my dad told me, it was boys who got all the action, you know, and I got a bit fed up with that. I had two brothers and I wanted some of the action myself. So I would say probably if I had to pick just one, it would be either The Steadfast Tin Soldier. I was quite happy about being made to cry, or Beauty and the Beast. Now, here are some questions from Bethany. Bethany says, do you ever get writer's block? And if you do, what do you do to help? Do you get writer's block, Bethany? I don't tend to get writer's block. What I do get is a kind of block about how I'm going to sort out my ending. And sometimes I have too many characters. And it's really difficult by the time I get to the book, because I've got all these characters all swilling around, and I've got to sort them all out and make sure that they're all settled and tucked up in bed, as it were, at the end of the story. If I did have writer's block, I think what I usually do if I can't solve a problem is I go for a walk. I go for quite a long walk, and it's something about walking, I think, really, really helps your brain jolt back into gear. And sometimes I take my mobile phone with me and I try, and if I think of something, I'll record it on my mobile phone. But I have to say, I'm not technically very efficient. So quite often when I get home and I try to listen to it back, I haven't recorded it. So it's not very helpful. And how do you come up with your characters? Do you base them on people you know? Yes and no. The very, very first story that I ever wrote, which I think is here, yep, here it is, was about people I know. The very first story I ever wrote was Totty Pig's Noisy Christmas. And that's me here. I'm Totty Pig. And the story was about my really horrible little brother. We get on better now a bit, but there he is. That's there's Mother Pig. And that's my little brother. Is it? Yeah, no, there he's down there. He's called Parker Pig. So I do take little bits sometimes from other people. My aunt, the one who used to make me cry, she turns up in Totty Pig as the auntie. And she talks like my aunt used to. She says, and what did you get, little Parker, Totty dear? What did you give him for Christmas? So, Yeah, I do use little bits, and I love it when I go into schools. I love watching the children and seeing what they're doing and the way they're interacting with each other. And I'll kind of keep those little bits of information. When somebody tells you to use your imagination, well, I think imagination is like having an enormous dustbin on top of your head, and you need to put things into it. And one of the ways I put things into my invisible dustbin is watching and listening. I do talk a lot. That's what I was good at when I was at school. But I also do like listening, and I like listening to little snippets of conversation. I got on a bus quite a long time ago now, and I was going up to the top deck. And as I was going up to the top deck, I heard these two women talking, and one of them said to the other, "Well, I've said all along, she should have thought about the banana." I'm still trying to think, what on earth, what was the story behind that? And I haven't come up with anything yet, but maybe one day I will. So if you're looking for ideas for characters, listen to other people. And I also really, really love names. I spent ages thinking of names. It's like Glom, I thought was a good name for a giant. And Hamfrida, I wanted to give that feeling of something rather solid and ham-like, Hamfrida. What else does Bethany says? Bethany also says, "What's your favourite thing at a tea party?" I suppose my most favourite thing of all is the friends, the people I'm chatting to at a tea party, but also cake. So cake and good friends, what more could you want, really? And I hope that after you finish listening to me this afternoon, that maybe you can have a cup of tea and think of me having my cup of tea at my little tea party. Question from Joyce: would I ever go back to acting? Yes, I still do occasionally manage to wangle my way onto a stage. It's quite hard because my daughter number 3 is a theatre director. So every so often I say to her, "Well, I could do that." And she says, "No." She says, "Oh, Mum." But I did manage to get myself onto a stage, not last year, because nobody was allowed anywhere last year. But in 2019, I was on stage in Aberdeen at the in a theatre there. And sometimes I do get to, I think when I tell stories, there's quite a lot of acting in that. And when I'm recording the books, I love doing the voices. And I think I can get my acting feeling, as it were, out in that. All the difficult one, I have to say, the most difficult book to record was The Witch's Feast, because I had 6 different witches and they all had to have different voices. And trying to remember which witch had which voice was really, really hard work. And in the end, in the recording studio, because I have to go to a proper recording studio, I had bits of paper, and each witch was a teacher from one of my schools. I went to a lot of schools, so I had a lot of teachers to draw from. And I could remember that the head of the witches, Madame Mavis Mortlock, and Madame Mavis Mortlock always talks like that, because that was my maths teacher, Miss Plunkett, at one of the schools I went to. So yeah, so I like doing the acting and the voices, really, I think. Question from Sarah: what story are you working on next? I'm just started writing a story about a group, and there's a grandfather and 2 children. One of them's called Mitty Scribbling, and her brother is called Weezer Scribbling, and they live in a caravan because Grandpa Scribbling is he has a little toe, and if his little toe aches, he thinks something is a very good idea. And he had this idea that it was quite all right to leave 27 candles burning in his house while he popped out for a loaf of bread and a pint of milk. And when he came back, the house was burnt to the ground. And so he and Mitty and Weezer have had to go traveling in an old caravan. And also in the family, this goes back to names and characters, is an uncle. And the uncle is called Uncle Pelmet. And he's called Uncle Pelmet because I don't know if you know, but some people have curtains. And the curtains at their windows, they have the curtains that go down, and along the top, there's a sort of fabric bit that kind of covers up the workings of, how you pull the curtains. And that's called a pelmet. And my daughters were having a conversation because one of them's buying a new house. And she said, oh, and there are these awful gold pelmets with little tassels on. And I thought pelmet is such a great word. So I've got Uncle Pelmet. So I'm working on that at the moment. Oh, wow. Lots of questions popped through. Question from Simon. Do you have any tips for young writers coming up with names for their characters? Yes. I mean, like I was saying, look around you. Pelmet is such a good word, I think. And I also rather like the word tassel. I collect words. I have a little notebook. I've no idea where it is because there's a horrible mess in here. It's a good thing you can't see it or you'd be very shocked. And I collect words and save them so that if I need a name for something, I can use it. I wrote a book a couple of years ago called The Steam Whistle Theatre Company, and there's a character in that called Oleo Sleevery. And that took me quite a long time to work out his name. And I wrote down all the words I could think of that, like slimy and sleazy and oily and things like that, and then tried to put them together. And that can be a really good way of finding names. The other way, a good place to find good names, is people's dogs. People call their dogs the most amazing things. I've got a character in a book called Ace, because I met somebody who had an Alsatian called Ace. So I used that. And another really, really good tip for names is maps. Have a look at a map. I'm just having a look to see if I've got a map anywhere near me. And of course, because it would be useful, I haven't. But if you look at maps, you can quite often take good names for that. A book I wrote called The Robe of Skulls has got Lady Lamorna in it, and that's a place in Scotland. I use Scottish place names a lot. And my characters live in various kingdoms that are named after villages. Oh, and I was driving out of Edinburgh and I saw a road sign and it said Mousewater, 5 miles. And so I've got a character called Saturday Mousewater. So I recommend looking at a map. Question from Lucas. Have you ever made a character that you haven't found the right story for yet? That is a brilliant question. Have I ever found? I have a lot of characters swirling around inside my head. I'm quite happy that I'm writing the scribblings at the moment because they're not quite people. I'm not sure what they are, but they're not quite people. And the Wizard's Banquet, I used a character that's been in my head for a while. I'm sure that there are more characters, and sometimes I have to cut characters out of a story. I don't know whether your teachers sometimes say to you, that story's much too long. I mostly get told that my stories are too muddled or I've spent too long on the ending. But sometimes I get told there are too many characters in this. Oh, I know a character that I haven't found. Well, she was in a story, but then she had to be cut out. And that was somebody's very irritating mother. And so I've got a very irritating mother who's always saying the wrong thing. So at some point she'll have to find a story. Joyce says, do you ever go back and read the stories you were told as a child? Yes, I do. I still read them. I'm lucky. I've got 6 grandchildren, and I read to them whenever I'm staying there. I always get to read them their bedtime stories. And sometimes the stories that I was read seem very, not exactly boring, but I think while I'm reading them, I think, and I change them. I'm ruthless about changing them. There's a story, Why the Sea is Salt, that I was read by my dad. And when I was read that story, the hero was a boy and he was a youngest son. And when I tell the story, it's a heroine and she's a girl and she is the oldest child, because I don't know whether you've noticed, but oldest children don't very often get much of the action, or if they do, they get it wrong, and then it's the youngest who gets it right. So I do go back, but I allow myself to change things if I want to. What else? Question from Susie. Those illustrations are wonderful. How involved do you get to be with their development? Quite a lot. Marta and I are really good friends. And quite often I'll get a message saying, how do you imagine this particular character? And with the Giant's Tea Party, we had a lot of discussions about Hamfrida. That's the giant. There she is. And I said, I really, really wanted her to have red hair, because when I was very little, I had red hair. My granny had red hair. My cousin had red hair. My daughter's husband has got red hair. And a lot of the kids I see in school have red hair. And I thought it would be really nice to have a red-haired giant. And Hamfrida is lovely. She's really kind. And so anyway, so she's got red hair. And we've just been having discussions about the new book, The Wizard's Banquet, because poor Marta, the illustrator, one of the characters is called Latterly Pot. And Latterly Pot is a cooking pot. And I had a message from Marta saying, how am I supposed to draw a character that's a pot, a cooking pot? So I don't ever illustrate my own books, but I do draw. And I drew her a picture of a little pot with 4 legs, so that she could wave her one hand around, and a face. And she said, oh, thank you very much. And I hope it helped. I don't know whether it did, but anyway, I had to try. And there was also a lot of questions. We had a lot of discussions about Marta and I about the princess, the one with the one who was under the table in the pictures, and she's called Princess Persephone. Her name is Princess Persephone Stephanie Tiffany Jane. And her parents really don't take any notice of her at all. All they care about is Prince Dribble. And when Marta was drawing Princess Persephone Stephanie Tiffany Jane, to start off with, she made her have really quite long skirts and quite fluffy, and they look quite expensive. And I wanted her to look really tatty. And we went to and fro, and I kept saying, put some mud on it, Marta, make her dress dirty, put some mends on it, some mending on it. And in the end, so Marta finally came up with the picture that you saw, and there's another picture here. And in fact, it's rather sweet, because Marta's actually, she's given her a sticky plaster on her knee. Rather than putting the patch on her dress, Marta's put the patch on Princess Persephone Stephanie Tiffany Jane. I have to say she's called Pom for short, mainly because I am very lazy and I didn't want to have to keep writing out Persephone. Question from Sarah. Who is my favourite character from all the ones you have written? There's a question. In the series Tales from the Five Kingdoms, there's a queen, and she is called Queen Bluebell, and I am very fond of her. And the other character that I am really, really fond of is the wisest one. There's another picture of the wisest one at the end of the story. And you can see she's still got all her books in her pocket. And I like the wisest one because, as I say, I think I might end up like that. Can't think of anything better. Sitting in a nice comfy armchair with a lamp beside me and lots of books and a cup of tea and cake and maybe some friends to share it with. And I think that would be really, really fun. And I can't think of anything nicer. So I think that unless there are any more questions, no, we've got all the questions coming through. So that's great. So I might just read, just to finish up with, I've been interviewing people this week and I've made them all read something at the end. So actually what I'm going to read you is I'm going to go back to the beginning of The Giant's Tea Party, chapter 1. In the kingdom of Little Slippington, things were not going well. Does 4 and 7 make 40? King Ferdinand sounded hopeful. Oh, Pa! Prince Maximilian Olivier Adolphus de Frogholm, known to his friends as Max, put down his book. It couldn't possibly be 40. It's 11. That's a shame, King Ferdinand sighed. I was so hoping it was 40. I need 40 gold pieces rather urgently. In fact, I need 40 gold pieces extremely urgently. Queen Gloria looked up from her knitting. Is there a problem, dear? A problem? The king drooped over his piles of coins. Yes, I can't pay the butcher or the baker or the candlestick maker, Max said brightly. Why in the world would I want to pay a candlestick maker? A suspicious look came over the king's face. Have you been buying candlesticks and not telling me, Maximilian? It was Max's turn to look astonished. You know I can't buy anything, Pa. I haven't had any pocket money for months. And if I did have any money, which I don't, I'd buy something sensible like a book. So if you want to buy a book, all the details are up on the Big Dog Festival website. And you can also borrow the books from the library. And I hope very much that sometime soon, this year maybe, I'll get to see you for real. And in the meantime, I'm going to have my cup of tea and my cake. And I'm going to wish you the very, very best and have a lovely weekend. And here's to tea and cake. So thank you very much.